this is John. I'd like to start a series on farming for profit. What is it, and how do we make a profit as a farm? I think it's quite well known that productivity per se does not equate with profitability. We can be productive, we can produce very high yields, but those generally cost a lot of money and might not necessarily translate into a good profit. We often talk about we are in farming to make a profit, we're in business to make a profit, but we don't actually often begin with that profit. How much do we want to make, and how are we going to make it? We often look at what enterprises we got and what their gross margins are, what their costs are, and we build up from the cost base to see if we can eventually achieve a profit. But I'd like us to look at this concept from the other way around, from starting with profit. What is profit? And how much profit do we want? And how do we work backwards from that profit down to our enterprises and the enterprise costs? But I think a starting point when we want to look at our farming as a business is to look at what is our vision for our farm. What do we want to achieve in the long run? What is our personal aspirations for our farm? Now, there's an interesting concept that we can consider when we're thinking about our future. There are three components to our future which we need to think about. The first is our financial. How do we want to become and be viable? The second is our social context, our family, our community. What do we want to achieve there? And thirdly is the environment. I think as farmers, we very often consider the environment as a very high priority, and rightly so. So these three things, our environment, our social context, and our financial aspirations, need to be considered when we think about our vision for our farm. A vision is something that we aspire to, that we long to see. It's not something that we have right now. We all have our farms in whatever context it is. It might be small, it might be large. It might be ours, it might be leased. It might be traditional land ownership. But we have this land, and we need to think of that land in terms of the landscape in which it exists and the ecology in which it exists, and to strive for a future that is not only sustainable, but more than sustainable, something that is going to be handed over to our next generation. A kind of environment that we want to achieve. But also we want to think about that in terms of our social context, our family, our community, and even as far as our country. How do we see our farm fitting into that scenario? And then, of course, we need to be financially viable. Viable today, but also viable in the future. We want a farm that is profitable and productive, but profitable. And when we combine those three things, the environmental aspirations that we have, our community considerations, and our financial hopes, in those three contexts, we shall be satisfied and happy as a farmer and as a family. So when we think about our vision, I'd like us to look at this little diagram that might help us to think through this concept. Now, as we think of our vision, we can think of three spheres of interest. I'm just going to draw these simple circles to try and help us to understand it. So here we have three circles that are overlapping. And this first one here we can put as our financial. These are our financial aspirations. that we might have. And then here we can look at our environmental, what we would like to see in our environment of our farm. And then thirdly, our social context. How do we want to integrate our farm and lives with our family and our community, and to a large extent, the country that we're in? Now, when we think of our financial scenario, we have certain constraints. Okay, we never seem to have enough money, but we also have certain desires. So how do we look at these constraints and express our desires to achieve a financial future that will satisfy us? Then when we look at our social context, we are thinking about our relationships. So these are relationships that are close and even going further afield. How do we want to build those relationships? How do we want to manage those relationships? And then we're looking at our community. So we all live in a community, and we need to interact and relate to that community and understand how we can build and maintain and develop those communities that we're in. And then thirdly, on the environment, we have the landscape. So the landscape is everything in the land that's on the farm and around the farm, how we see that and how we would like to see that develop. And then on that landscape is biology and soil. And basically, as a farmer, you are farming the soil with the biology, whether that's plants, animals, or both. So we need to be thinking about what we want to achieve in those three areas. Now, if we consider the financial scenario and the environmental scenario, we want that to be a viable farm, a farm that is financially viable and that maintains and improves, regenerates our environment. When we consider our financial scenario and our social scenario, we are looking at what we might call equity. Okay, so we want some equity, some ethical approach to our financial goals as well as our social goals. And then when we consider our social and our environment, we want this to be what we might call bearable. Okay, so anything that we do in our environment is going to have some impact also on our social context. And we want that to be bearable. And when we combine all three of these things, we hopefully will be sustainable. So that's one way of looking at your goal and developing your vision for your farm. That you'll look 5-10 years ahead and think deeply about, what do I want on these three things: finance, social, and environmental? And then try and express that in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences to define your vision. Once you define your vision, you can express that and convey that to your family and the people who work on your farm. That community that you have on your farm and around your farm. As people understand your vision, they can buy into it, they can participate in it, and as you make your decisions as you go along, you have that future aspiration in your mind. Now, another good way of thinking about your vision is to write it in a simple and understandable statement. And that vision is what you're going to work towards. So you're going to have activities that are going to drive you towards that vision. But that vision also has to have certain attributes attached to that are going to guide you in your activities towards that vision. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. The one is to consider what I like to call your virtues. Your virtues. And these are like stars that will guide you in your actions and in your relationships with your community. So these are like stars in the sky. My father was in the Navy during the Second World War, and they didn't have GPS in those days, and so they used the stars to navigate with. And as I grew up, he used to teach me about the stars and how you could find your way looking at the different constellations. And so that's what I see these as. They are the inviolable ethical standards that will serve as boundaries for behavior. So these are your ethical standards. They might be things like truth. Okay, you're going to do everything truthfully. And you can think through what kind of virtues you think are important for your farm, for your family, and so on. And then to support your vision, there are certain cross-cutting ways of operating your farm. And these I kind of draw as like arrows like this because they are cross-cutting. They will be kind of guiding principles to your operations, how you will actually operate on your farm. And I've drawn 4 here. You can have more or less. There's no rule concerning this. But these are the operational, vital components to your business. So you might think of something like conservation. Okay, so whatever you do, you're going to be concerned about conservation of resources. It could also be something like innovative. You're going to try and do things differently, cleverly, well, and so on. So you can see these are slightly different from the virtues. These are what I call the vitals. Vitals. They are vital components to the way you're going to operate. So again, these are things which you then transmit to your community, your employees, your family, your neighbors, and so on. That if somebody's going to come and work for you, there are these ethical boundaries, these principles by which you're going to operate. And if anyone crosses or goes beyond those boundaries, it's unacceptable. And then these vital components are going to be those ways of doing your work that are non-negotiable. So, for example, timeliness. Okay, on this farm, we are going to do things in a timely manner. We're going to do things efficiently or effectively. We are going to do things with conservation of resources in mind or without wastage. We are going to be efficient and so on. So these are the vital components of your operations. So once you've developed your vision and you've described or identified your vital components and virtues in your farm, you can write these out and then begin to look at what are the main activities that you need to start initiating now in order to achieve that vision. And sometimes you might think of something like 5 bold steps that you're going to take now. Okay, when you look at your farm now and you think of what your aspirations are for finance, social, and environment, and you consider these vitals and virtues, and you know where you are today, that maybe you're not achieving some of these things, or maybe there are some aspects of your operations which don't fit into that scenario that you've just described. Well, what are these 5 bold steps that you need to start implementing now to begin this walk, this process of achieving your vision? And these might be something simple like conveying the vision to staff. Okay, now hopefully your staff and or at least your senior staff have been involved in helping you to describe your vision and your virtues and your vitals. But you now begin to convey that, communicate that to your whole staff complement and your family and your nearby community that sees you and your farm. It could be something simple like, okay, we're going to start conserving soil better. Okay, because we are basically farming our soil. So how are we going to really begin to improve our soil, conserve our soil, look at soil health, look at all the aspects of soil health, and begin to implement things? So obviously these steps will be very much contextual to your farm. And that's why I'm just giving examples, because you have to analyze your own scenario and say, okay, these are the 5 bold steps that I want to start looking at straight away. Now, at the same time, when you think about your vision and these 5 bold steps, there are certain constraints that you are faced with. And these might be financial. Okay, you might have certain financial constraints. There might be environmental constraints that you have to deal with. And there may be infrastructure or resources. Okay, so what you need in terms of implements, machinery, buildings, whatever that you might need to help you get towards your vision. But at the same time, there are also opportunities. And we need to look at those opportunities. Because to achieve our vision, it's really looking at what opportunities there are that can help us to get to that. And that might be things like markets, what markets there are that you can see and engage in. There may be things like opportunities to build soil health. Okay, as you think through the way you're operating your farming, are there certain things that you can do or change or bring in to improve soil health? So again, these are just examples. They are things that you need to think through and write down and think how you can exploit or take advantage or make use of those opportunities. So that is a kind of a simple overview of how to think about your future, and bringing that future into your present context. Now, in every situation, you've got your future aspiration, okay, your vision, all right, but you are in a present reality. You're in a present reality. So this is your goal, and this is your reality. But now you want to move from your present reality to your future aspiration. And this is where your planning and implementation comes into play. So now we can really begin to plan our daily, weekly, monthly, annual activities. So there you have a brief overview of how I see us developing our vision for our farm. It's really what we dream for on our farm. And I would encourage you to dream big, to dream, really to think of your farm in a transformed way. That in 3 to 5 years, people won't recognize your farm because of what you've done there. And this is going to be your ideal farm. And it's important that we think like that. We as farmers need to be always forward looking and thinking how we can develop our farm into something which will be truly amazing and will provide a place where we can be happy and we can be profitable, and those around us and with us will also enjoy living there and being there, and not only being content but also contributing into our community and improving our environment. So thank you for watching this first session. I will bring on more as we go along. The next one we're going to look at is profit, and how do you actually define this profit and work it back down into your overheads and your gross margin, and how you develop your gross margin for your different enterprises. We have to start with profit. We always talk about profit, but we need to define that profit of how much profit do we really want to make on our farm this year, this season coming. If we don't have that as a goal, and that goal doesn't fit into our vision, really we're not going to get anywhere. I remember I heard an interesting comment the other day. Somebody said, are we farming for money or are we farming with money? And I think a lot of us, and I've been in that scenario where you farm with money because you've got money in your pocket, either through some external business or a job or something, and you use that money to invest in your farm. And of course we have to invest in our farm, but we are not necessarily farming for money. We're not necessarily farming for profit. And I think this is where I want us to really think through how we begin with that profit that we want to make, and then work backwards to how we do our farming. So thanks for watching. I'll keep you updated with further episodes that will come out. Happy farming.